The Spirit-led leaders will lead people in the Spirit. And anything else should be unacceptable. I know I come from a corporate background. I have extensive leadership training. I have military background. I understand this. And you can find some really impressive crowd-building leaders in a church structure. But crowd building is easy. Church building is supernatural, and only God can do it. And it takes those that are in tune to Him while being surrendered to Him. That will bring the passion, deal with the problems, be, if need be, politically incorrect, who will identify the potential and put in place the right people that God's plan will unfold. This is what we're seeing. Now, in verse 3 continues, Paul took Timothy and he circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those parts, poor Timothy. For they all knew that his father was a Greek. So hang on, this doesn't make sense. Paul, who had recently just argued that there's no need for circumcision, first thing he does with this guy that he says God has given him, who he's going to appoint to leadership, is he circumcises him. Like, what's up with that, Paul? Before we unpack that, let me just point out that church planting and disciple making will involve painful precautions. It will hurt you in different ways. But being the church will come at a cost, and it will involve pain. And sometimes those pains will come upon you, and sometimes you'll proactively embrace the pain as a precaution. It's like, why? Well, I tell you this, true servants of God accept circumcision. Sacrifice, where and when you truly embrace sacrifice, you'll experience circumcision. And the savvy are going to need to be able to explain this circumcision. Let me just share with you how this looks. Timothy is willing to be circumcised. I guarantee you nobody volunteers for circumcision. But he's willing to. He accepts it because he recognizes the plan of God and the purposes of God. And he himself is a person of God. So he accepts this. He experiences it. It's real. If all we do is talk about persecution, right, and we look at some videos of the people being persecuted overseas, oh yeah, I agree, that's horrible. But we don't experience it, it's not real, right? If I'm not willing to take the persecution of being ostracized in my work environment around the neighborhood, what makes me think I would ever be willing to go and have my head cut off without denying Christ? See, persecution is here. We just say, well, it's not like over there. That's the stuff that matters. No, yours and my life matters. And if you're going to be the church, you will experience some degree of pain, some degree of some form of circumcision. Now, the savvy, let me just point out here, to explain the circumcision. Paul is not changing his mind. He's not suddenly going from one who says, no need for circumcision amongst the Gentiles. We see here that Timothy, one of his parents was a Jew. One of his parents was a Gentile. Paul knows that when they go into the Jewish ministries, when they go as missionaries and they're amongst the Jews, that if Timothy is not circumcised, then the mission field, the people, are going to say, oh, he's a Gentile. He denounced his Jewish roots, and he's chosen to disrespect us. Paul says, you know what? You're half Jew. In order to reduce the friction, we should circumcise you. Not because you have to be saved, but you as a missionary, you see, you have rights that righteousness will call you to lay down. When you want to champion righteousness beyond your rights, when it's more important to me that I am able to be used of God to impact that community, I'll lay down my rights to do so. Now, we know this is true because later on, Titus, who is a Gentile, similar to Timothy, one that Paul is going to mentor and send out, Titus comes and he says, hey, we need to circumcise Titus too, just like we did Timothy. Paul says, absolutely not, under no circumstances. You cannot circumcise Titus. And again, they're like, why? what's up with this? Paul, have you lost your head? Right? And he says, no, let me explain. I said no to the Gentiles because it's not a condition of salvation and they're being told that it is. That's wrong. I said yes to Timothy because he's half Jew, and it's more important that he's effective as a missionary than he not go through the pain of what it would take to strengthen his witness. I say no to Titus because he's a Gentile. We're back to the beginning. And I do not want there to be hypocrisy. Now, I explain that to you because on the surface, people say, I don't know, like that Paul, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. It's not true. But again, this is how the devil will work. This is how warfare works. Throw some seeds of doubt, sprinkle a little dissension in there, a little innuendo. Well, I don't know. You know how those people get. No. It's the truth. There will be pain involved. But it's not unnecessary pain, and it's not something that isn't a part of God's consistency and his plan. You see here in Timothy through Paul, supernatural, selfless, sacrificial living. If you're truly going to plant a church, if you're truly going to make a disciple out of somebody, you're going to have to live selflessly. You're going to make sacrifices for them. And the reality is sometimes it's going to hurt. I can tell you in a transparent, raw way, one of those places where pain comes is when you emotionally become attached. One of the toughest things in the world is to love somebody and then watch them just stab you in the back, or do things that are going to hurt your family. I wish I could tell you that that doesn't happen in the church. It's not true. And the issue is not that church is bad or that church and Christ's potential is not there. The issue is that there is sin, and there are people who fail. There are people who deceive, who present themselves as one thing when in reality, over time, you realize there's something else. All I can tell you is it's going to be messy, but our Messiah is worth it. And if you think about it, for all of us that do know Christ as Lord, there was a time when we were a mess. And I like to tell people that your mess often becomes your message. That what was your misery oftentimes becomes your ministry. And that's there to help us empathize. When somebody who's jacked up jacks you up, you remember, I used to be jacked up, and I jacked other people up. Okay, wow, Lord, help me, right? There's a dependency again on the Spirit of God.